It's a theological world. After all, after all, after all, after all.
Philosophers and scientists keep returning to the same unyielding question: what is consciousness and why does it exist at all? For some, it's an unsolved puzzle. For others, it's a clue. In this episode, Joshua Farris, myself, is joined once again by philosopher Dr. Stephen Priest, whose clarity and wit make it even the hardest questions feel alive. Together, we are going to explore why consciousness remains a stubborn mystery for naturalism, how existentialism without theism collapses into despair, and why, in the end, God is not an optional hypothesis, but the ground of all meaning. If you've ever wondered whether your awareness points beyond itself to something eternal, personal, and divine, this episode is for you. Welcome back to It's a Theological World After All. I'm delighted to welcome again my friend, our guest, the distinguished philosopher Stephen Priest, who somehow manages to make philosophy not only understandable, but entertaining, deep, rich, and theistic. Last time we explored existentialism and theology briefly, how modern thought in the search for meaning often finds itself haunted by the very God it tries to escape. Today we're returning to that haunting, but through the lens of consciousness, again, because if there's one thing modern philosophy and science can't quite explain, it's you, the conscious thinking you, the self who knows and feels and wonders. We'll ask, why does consciousness remain such a stubborn mystery for naturalism? What happens when existentialism forgets that God it needs? And why might God not be an optional explanation, but the very condition for thought, meaning, and love? Whether you come for philosophy, theology, or simply to recover a sense of wonder, stay with us, because to understand consciousness in some small way is to glimpse the mind of God. We've seen world leaders grapple with AI and human dignity as well. Does this conversation even make sense without a robust view of consciousness and personhood? I'm reminded of the recent conversation, the G7 conversation with Pope Francis. Again, this is the Theological World After All. I'm your host, Joshua Farris. Welcome. And welcome, Dr. Priest. Stephen, good to have you with us.
Thank you very much for inviting me again, and thank you for that, I feel, quite flattering introduction. I'll try and live up to it.
Oh, very good. I know you will. Yeah. I know we last time we talked about existentialism, so maybe just picking up the thread just a bit. We won't hang out here too long unless it goes that direction. We can. I want to talk about existentialism and how it reveals our hunger for God as a kind of bridge to the last episode where we talked. When we spoke last, we ended on the idea that existentialism seems to need theism. Consciousness seems to bear it out. And in fact, even in the space of consciousness where we think of no thingness, no thing to be counted at least, consciousness seems to point to the ultimate explanation of God or something like it. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, you talk about existentialism and the hunger for God. I think there are many different levels at which we can address this important question. What is the relationship between fundamental questions of human existence, as posed by, for example, existentialists, and on the other hand, the question of the existence of God? Now, somebody of a modernist or skeptical or atheist or humanist frame of mind might say, well, indeed, at least in the atheistic existentialists, there are descriptions of despair and absurdity and meaninglessness, and the only values that there are invented by human beings, this sort of thing in Nietzsche and in Sartre, for example. But someone of that frame of mind say, well, that's just the way it is. There is no God, or insofar as we can tell, there is no God, and this rather bleak existentialist picture is a realistic picture of our condition. Now, there are existentialists who reject this view. For example, Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish Lutheran theologian and philosopher who wrote in the first half of the 19th century, he thinks that in the face of this despair, the only possibility is the leap of faith. You've got to believe in God, otherwise the human condition is utterly intolerable, and there's a kind of truth in that. A profound truth. Kierkegaard says truth is subjectivity. He's often misquoted as saying that truth is subjective, as though Kierkegaard thinks that truth is just a matter of opinion or something like that. But he doesn't say that. He says truth is subjectivity. So it's in one's own being, and one's own being directed towards God as the answer. That truth lies, according to Kierkegaard. But somebody who is of an atheistic, agnostic, and very logical point of view or frame of mind would perhaps say it still doesn't follow as a matter of logic that God exists. I mean, maybe this pessimistic and anxiety-ridden human condition is just the way it is, and there is no relief. There is no divine antidote to this situation, or the Kierkegaard argument looks rather pragmatic rather than logical. This reminds me of something my father told me. My father's long dead. My father was an atheist. But my father had to join the British Army in 1944. He had to join the Welsh Guards, which is a very good regiment in the British Army. It's part of the Brigade of Guards. But the senior NCO who was enrolling them, this was obviously during the war, during the war in 1944. The NCO asked name, asked the priest, religion, and my dad said atheist, and the senior NCO said atheist, no good in battle, Church of England, and that was the response. Atheists, no good in battle, Church of England. They're going to go off to Normandy. Okay, so in this situation, in the dire situation of combat or facing death, the only solution is the existence of God, or the only philosophy you can live by entails the existence of God. On this view taken by the Welsh Guards, for example, atheism isn't a philosophy you can live by. So there's a kind of pragmatic test there. But again, in the face of all this human reality and despair and facing death and suffering and so on, I think the logically minded atheist is still going to say, well, there's no logical inference from these dire conditions to the existence of God. But I'm inclined to say that there's a second, there are many levels, but there's a second entire level at which we can come to this discussion, which is to do with existentialism in two of its forms. One is fundamental ontology. Heidegger's philosophy is called fundamental ontology. Heidegger denies that he's an existentialist, but we needn't bother very much about that. He is a kind of existentialist. Fundamental ontology, the study of being, or the attempt to explain what it is to be, for anything to be, or for there to be being rather than nothingness. And the other strand of existentialism, or the other fusion in a way that's made, is with phenomenology, and this fusion is called existential phenomenology. And there are tendencies within that which are revelatory of your own existence and features of your own existence that you might not have noticed. Now, through these routes, fundamental ontology and existential phenomenology, I think we can come to really proofs of the existence of God. I partly because of my father, I was brought up atheist and was atheistic in my approach to philosophical problems, and it's only really the failure of secular and humanist and skeptical and relativist and all these other approaches to philosophical problems that's led me to theism. I certainly did not have any prior preference that Christianity should be true or something or something like that. I was brought up to be very skeptical of religious beliefs and indeed religious institutions by my father. So I make my motivations here clear because people say, "Oh, this is wish fulfillment," or "You would think that, wouldn't you, because you're a Christian," and so on. I mean, I would like to be a Christian, but I'm not sure you can self-appoint to be a Christian or indeed much else, right? But in being a Christian, it sounds like an achievement to me. It sounds like something you might manage or you might not manage. Certainly, to live a Christian life looks like an achievement and a terribly hard thing to do. But to go back to the fundamental ontology for a moment, Heidegger in Being and Time, as we said in one of the previous interviews, the 1927 book, he tries to answer the question of being. What is it to be? And he the way I read him, at least, he understands being globally. There is being rather than nothing, or there's existence as a whole rather than nothingness. He tends to reserve the word exists for human existence because it has this exist stance, this going out of or projection forwards. But never mind about that. We can use the word being or sein to mean existence as a whole. Now, I think that if we seriously try to answer this question, what is existence or what is being as a whole, we mustn't get it mixed up with a different question, which is what is the totality of what there is, or what is the aggregate of objects and numbers and consciousnesses and things like that. I mean, by being rather than not being, I mean pure being full stop. I don't mean being mathematical or being political or being red or being the number three or something like that. Now, once we start to inspect the properties of pure being, in a way, Heidegger gets stalled. But if we look at the proto-Heideggerian thinker Parmenides, the pre-Socratic Greek philosopher, he inspects being directly. The more we investigate pure being, the more pure being is revealed to have the essential properties of God. Unless there's pure being, there's nothing at all. Being is not in any straightforward way a being. Being might be necessarily one being and a being in that sense, but in the ordinary sense of in English, being is not being. Being is not a being amongst beings. Being is pure being or being itself. Being is not this being or that being in the world, or indeed beyond it. So being, as I said in a previous discussion we were having, Joshua, being necessarily is rather than is contingently. Of course, the mass of objects exists contingently. The particular beings that there are might not have been, even though they are. They might not have existed, even though they do exist. But there's necessarily being rather than nothingness, because there's necessarily no nothingness. It's essential and necessary, so to speak, that nothing does not exist, that there's no such thing as nothing. Well, if you accept the distinction between being and nothingness as jointly exhaustive, that only leaves you with the necessary existence of being. That means that being exists necessarily rather than contingently. Now, the more you build in these properties, the more and more pure being looks like the being of God, or being looks like God as God. Being is necessary for beings. Being is necessary for existence. being necessarily exists. Being is necessarily one. Beings are a plurality, or there could have been only one being, or there happen to be many beings. Perhaps there's an infinite number of beings, depending on how you count them. But being rather than not being is monolithic, or essentially and necessarily one. So the more we look at this, the more you see at a very fundamental level, we're recognizing the characteristics of the Christian God, or the God of Judeo-Christian monotheism. Now, in outlining this view for the viewers, I don't want to be misunderstood as saying that God is the universe, or God is the totality of beings, or God is existence as a whole, or something like that. I don't think that that's right at all, because on the view that I'm putting over, there's a very clean and sharp distinction between being on the one hand and beings on the other hand. And being is primordial with regard to beings, or you couldn't have beings without being, but you could have being without beings. This is equivalent in my thinking to the Christian view that God creates optionally, or God creates through his own free will. You can see this in the necessity of being. God can't not be, but the contingency of beings, there might not have been any beings, but there are beings. Now you could ask the question, why are there any beings? Why are there any beings? The only possible explanation, the only possibility is that beings, or pure being, generates or creates beings, and not out of any previously existing beings either, just through pure being. If you like, B hyphen ing, B dash ing, as you'd say. Yeah. So all that is about. I mean, Heidegger says that we should try to recover ancient Greek philosophy, and he means Parmenides and Heraclitus and some other people. But I feel, although a very, very interesting and important thinker, Heidegger didn't recover enough ancient Greek thinking. He didn't recover enough ancient Greek thinking to fully recover Parmenides, even though he wrote about Parmenides and lectured about Parmenides. And he doesn't understand, or he doesn't see clearly, the Christian implications of Parmenides' thought. So in order to answer the question of being, which Heidegger raises very clearly and very well, we have to say that being is the being of God, or pure being is the being of God. And the best or clearest route to that is through Parmenides, I think, because I mean Parmenides is talking about pure being, or just being qua being, or being full stop. He's not talking about the totality of what there is, or particular beings. I mean, Parmenides is known for saying there is no motion and there is no plurality. So for Parmenides, it's not the case that there's the plurality of things that there are, and it's not the case that anything moves or anything changes. Now, if you read Parmenides and you don't realize he's talking at the level of pure being, he'll just seem insane. Just insane. All right. It just seems insane. Of course, but of course, Parmenides is surrounded by physical objects in ancient Greece, or Elia is now part of Turkey, the Greek colonies, and Parmenides is well aware that things move around him, but at a commonsensical level, or at the level of beings. But he's not writing at that level. He's writing at the level that Heidegger, 2,500 years later, will call fundamental ontology. Fundamental ontology is the attempt to answer the question, what is it to be rather than not to be, or what is being as opposed to nothing, or nothingness. All right. Ordinary ontology in philosophy is a branch of philosophy which tries to decide what exists and what does not exist. Do numbers exist? Do physical objects exist? Do corners exist? Do acts of political power exist? If so, what is it for these things to exist, right? But fundamental ontology asks the question, well, what is it to exist rather than not exist? Or be rather than not be? Yeah. So you can come at, you see, now, if you accept that fundamental ontology is a kind of existentialism, or is bound up with existentialism in Heidegger's book, the 1927 book, Being and Time, then you can see that God is presupposed by Heidegger. I mean, you could say God is presupposed by everybody and everything, wittingly or not, but you can trace the presupposition through Heidegger's thought, especially if we take seriously Heidegger's suggestion that we recover early Greek thinking. We should take seriously early Greek thinking. So that's good. I've said quite a lot now, but what is it to be is in a way an existentialist question, because more narrowly, in a more narrowly existentialist sense, one could ask, well, what is it for you to exist, or what is it for me to exist? What is it for what is the being doing in human being? What is this being that we're doing? But you're not going to get very far with that unless you've got a grip on the wider question: what is it to be rather than not to be? Heidegger himself, as we said in a previous talk, doesn't finish the book and doesn't manage to answer the question of being. He decides that there's a kind of time which might be presupposed by being rather than not being, but he doesn't really answer the Seinsfrage. He shies away from it because it would involve doing metaphysics. I'm not afraid of doing metaphysics. And of course, I mean, you see, modern philosophy in many ways is quite removed from the ways of thinking we're talking about, because the movements in modern philosophy, which have dominated philosophy since Immanuel Kant, are very anti-metaphysical. So you'd have to start to take the metaphysical questions very seriously to see the need for God through philosophy. And then you'd have to see that these metaphysical questions can only be answered if God exists. And the soul is immortal, and we have free will and things like that. So modern philosophy is a few removes really from theism. There are exceptions. There are people like Richard Swinburne and Alvin Plantinga, very capable people who argue directly for the existence of God. But if you study philosophy in a university in the US or the UK or possibly in Europe, and you do philosophy of religion, that's really one paper or one course, or it's compartmentalized within the faculty or within the university just into one course. But on my view, you need to do philosophy of religion on just about all the philosophy courses in order to solve the problems. So you can ask, well, do I have faith in God, or do I think you should have faith in God? Well, yes, but the faith in God that I have, I think, is entailed by the knowledge that God exists. And when I say God exists, I mean I'm ascribing divinity to pure being, or I'm saying that existence is fundamentally God, rather than the usual order of priorities, where you wonder, you think, well, this huge invisible being kind of lurking somewhere the other side of the sky. Now, I wonder if there could be such a thing lurking there or not, the sort of huge invisible man. Now, how am I going to prove that this is there or that it's not there? Very, very, very. Now, that whole enterprise is in a way going in the wrong direction from my point of view. Not within the transient. Our lives are transient. We live so many years and we interact with these people and physical objects. But all these lives and all these interactions are taking place within pure presence, which is the presence of pure being. And they take place within pure being, which is the being of pure presence. So I think that there are there are hints of this all over existentialism and phenomenology and fundamental ontology. These movements, which are tied together. But I think the most profound and clear understanding of all this is in terms of the Holy Trinity. I think, as I said in a previous talk, I think the first person of the Trinity is pure being, the I am of Exodus, and I think that the second person of the Trinity, the Christ, is the presence of God. Christ is the presence of God. It's part of Christian doctrine that Christ has existed from all eternity. Well, one way of understanding that is that Christ is timeless. I don't mean qua human being, obviously. I mean, as the second person of the Trinity, Christ is timeless or eternal or out of time. So, on a Christian view, then you see, whether we realize it or not, we're living in the presence of Christ. Or it's not possible to be absent from Christ. But or if there's absence from Christ, it's our fault. Okay.
Yes.
It's our fault.
Yes.
Or it's something to do with that.
Yeah.
We're ignorant, or we're stupid, or we're evil, or we're fallen, or it's all on the side of us. But God is there, and if we call the presence of God Christ, God is present to us all the time. Saint Augustine says somewhere that when you die, you'll realize that God was holding you all along. When you die, you'll realize that God was holding you all along. There are many ways of taking this, but my way of reading this now is that when you die, the time is still now. Or when you die, the time doesn't stop being now. The now is indestructible. You're not indestructible, but the now is indestructible. And so when your body and your mind die, or that part of your mind that depends on the brain that we're talking about, you are in the now, or the now abides. I mean, you said that there was a complication about this, that you're a presence and God is a presence. So we can ask the question, what is the relationship between you and God if each is in the presence of the other, so to speak? Well, there's a misleading way of thinking about this. It's not very useful to take a bird's eye view on a billiard table and look at two billiard balls colliding, or to look down on two objects which have an interface. I think that in earthly life, at least most of the time, the relationship between your presence and the presence of God is the empirical world, the world of objects and colors and shapes and sounds around us. Roughly speaking, creation, or that portion of creation which we're calling nature, that is what the interface, if we can use that word, between your presence and God's presence is like. It's full of colors and shapes and sounds. When you die, all that stops, I think, and you're directly in the presence of God. Your presence.
And God's that's presence. Good. We've expounded a lot about the nature of the intelligibility of consciousness, the condition, at least in order to talk about it, the condition of God himself, God being pure being, qua being, and presence being related to that. Pure being is presence, I think, and pure presence is being, or presence is pure being. They're almost they're in metaphysical sense, they're interchangeable. We picked up on a lot of these themes in the previous episode. We talked a lot. That was fascinating. Some of this regarding your understanding of the Trinity, you did touch upon this last time, I believe, but now I'm hearing you again, and I think there's a real interesting simplicity and profoundness to this understanding of the Trinity. Maybe it's right. I think I'm grasping much better now, your view of the Trinity, than I did before. So I think that's good. So I wonder, and maybe have you written on this if this sort of, if you can develop an argument for the existence of God, would the argument for the existence of God lead you to the Trinitarian God?
I think it very directly and essentially, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I trying to solve these philosophical problems or looking at these existentialists, you need the Holy Trinity to do the job of explaining existence and our existence and why it's now and things like that.
We were talking about the argument for God, and if that necessarily leads you to the to a Trinitarian God as even the intelligibility or the conditioned intelligibility for talking about consciousness, or the intellectual or the intelligibility for the being of consciousness itself, and whether or not that entails some kind of Trinitarian being like what we have in Christian revelation. And I think you were describing that. It sounds a bit like, at least it sounds like you'd be quite sympathetic to Augustine's psychology analogy and his De Trinitatis, and what he develops there in terms of arriving at the Trinitarian God via the mind itself.
Yeah, I think the order of priorities, in my understanding, or the way I have come at it, is to look at philosophical problems about being and about time. Heidegger's book is called Being and Time, where you can ask the question, what is being and what is time? Well, being is pure being, and time is the now, or there's no time without the unchanging now, or time as change is grounded in the unchanging now. Otherwise, nothing can happen. So the order of priorities is to look at these problems which are posed in a secular way, or in a theologically uninformed way, right? And then to say, well, look, solving these problems gives you pure being and pure presence, and there are interesting essential relations between pure being and pure presence. We can't make any sense of pure being except as present, and we can't make any sense of pure presence except as being rather than not being. So being is the being of presence, and presence is the presence of being. And then as a third stage, I'm saying, well, if the first two persons of the Holy Trinity are this, well, if they're anything at all, they'd better be at least this. I'm not saying this is all there is to the Trinity, or that the Trinity can be reduced to this fundamental ontology. It can't. But the Trinity entails this this fundamental ontology that I'm talking about. This distinction between being and presence. The reason why I say that, the Trinity has to be understood in this way, but not only in this way. There's plenty more that's true of the Trinity, obviously, including the insightful things that St. Augustine says about, the soul and the Trinity. The reason why the Trinity has to be understood as entailing being and presence is that being and presence are fundamental. Once you reach pure being, you've reached rock bottom. You've reached the necessary condition for anything and everything, which has no necessary condition except itself. Now, if there is a God, or if God does exist, God had better be this, or God had better include this feature, right? Otherwise, God won't be fundamental. Or to come at it as I did from a secular background, from an atheistic background, and begin to understand the need for God, the need to recognize the existence of God, you start with what's fundamental, and then you start being willing to call this God. You think, oh, well, what a surprise. We do fundamental ontology, and we find out that there is something fundamental, and it's called being rather than nothingness, or it's pure being rather than some subset of beings, right?
Yeah.
So, as I said earlier in the talk, what I've been doing is ascribing divinity to pure being, or saying that pure being is the being of God, rather than trying to prove the existence of God, trying to prove the existence of the Holy Trinity or something like that. I've come at it from the opposite direction. So I build from being and presence into theology, or upwards to theology. So it's as though, in a way, the components of the Trinity come before, up to a point, come before recognizing that, oh yeah, well, this must be the Christian God that we're talking about here.
Yes,
because you're talking about that without which there can't be anything whatsoever.
Right. Yes.
You're talking about the absolute foundation for absolutely anything whatsoever. I mean, it's quite interesting. There are different kinds of people doing philosophy, obviously, and there are many differences between academic philosophers. But one is between people who've got some sort of a grip on pure being or absolute being or being qua being, and others who haven't got the foggiest idea what you're talking about. Right. There's been a huge discussion about existence since Immanuel Kant wrote the Critique of Pure Reason in 2 editions towards the end of the 18th century. There's discussion is whether exists as a predicate. In other words, whether in saying that something exists, you're ascribing some sort of property to it, whether existing is a characteristic in some way. And there are, in this debate, there are reasons for doubting whether exists as a predicate. If you say, all those yellow post boxes in Oxford, they have the property of not existing, right? If you say that existing is a property, it looks as though things that don't exist actually lack some property, but actually they don't exist in order to bear or lack properties, right? So you've got this. Now I think that these are quite interesting questions about existence, but they're about the existence of this, that, and the other thing in the world, basically, or essentially. Now I think the whole question, what is it to be, or what is being, has been diverted or hijacked by plurality. But the difference between being and not being hasn't fundamentally got much to do with the plurality of objects that there are. But we're so habituated to visually perceiving physical objects around us that when we think of the question, what is it to exist rather than not exist, we think, well, what's the difference between a water bottle that exists and one that doesn't exist? But there's no need to conduct the debate in this manner at all. Being rather than not being is essentially tied to the being of a plurality, right? Even though there is a plurality of beings, right?
Yeah.
Now, once you realize this, Parmenides sees this very, very clearly, then you can start to describe pure being.
So, okay, good. Yeah. If we were to take this desk, I'm curious, this desk in front of me that I have with the books, on the laptop on top of it and things, and on your view of presence, I'm wondering, and I imagine listeners are wondering too, what this how do we make sense of this desk? Does this desk actually have presence?
Yeah, the object is present. Yeah, it's in your presence. It's in God's presence, and it's a present object. But by presence, I don't mean this or that present thing, but the objects that there are present. I mean, being
Yeah.
rather than not being is tied to being present. I mean, you could say George Washington did exist, but he does not exist, right? Because he did exist in the 18th century, but that's in the past. But if he existed now, we'd say that he existed, right?
Yeah.
So to exist is to exist now. But it's not any accident that our language works in that way. It's because being is the being of presence, and presence is the presence of being. If anything goes outside the now, it's annihilated. I mean, the states of your desk 3 or 4 seconds ago don't exist anymore, right? Your desk is in a new set of states now. Now those have gone. But despite the transience of what goes on in the presence, the coming and going of what goes on in the presence, it's still now. The now abides. The now itself is completely unchanging. It's hard to notice this because we're so used to objects coming and going, people drifting in and out of the room, cups of coffee being made or not made, having to take the dog for a walk, all these things, all these little duties and habits and things that we have. We tend to neglect the fact that it's only ever now. It's all happening within the now.
Yes.
But it is.
Yes.
It's all happening within the now. And once something goes out of the now, it's dissolved, it's evaporated. And the things that haven't happened yet, they don't exist yet either. They don't exist yet.
Right. So let's bring this around practically, because there's a lot of implications and applications here from this understanding of being as presence that's present to consciousness, or my consciousness and your consciousness, and living thoughtfully with wonder, prayer, and presence. How does this sort of view practically? How would it practically deepen our faith or our prayer life? How should we think about this notion of the ground of being?
I could say some things about that, but you must understand that I came from a secular background, and I don't feel hugely well trained in Christianity. Even though the Trinitarian God is the ultimate truth or reality.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah.
In the 1960s and 70s, Buddhism was very fashionable in the US and the UK. I suppose it still is up to a point. And
I think it's coming back in fashion too.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
is it? Okay,
more so.
okay.
Even
Right. I didn't know that. I don't think it's coming back in the UK so much, but maybe more in the US. But the thing is, in 1973, I learned how to do various kinds of meditation. I learned some Buddhist meditation, and I learned transcendental meditation, which is, I think, just a fragment of Vedanta. It's a kind of proto-Hindu kind of meditation. Now, I think these kinds of meditation, I was an atheist at the time, were very beneficial in dislodging my atheism and agnosticism and skepticism and all the anti-religious views that people were socialized into in the 60s and 70s. The reason I say this is that in different kinds of meditation, you could become directly acquainted with your own consciousness as something still and unchanging. In various kinds of meditation, you can become aware of pure being. And in various kinds of meditation, you can become aware of pure presence. So maybe it is a bit like St. Augustine, right? It's like the soul does have this Trinitarian structure, which means that we're made in the image of God. But of course, for me in 1973, that would be to rush ahead far too. I couldn't see very clearly at that time, right? I can see perhaps a bit clearer now. I don't know. But I think that in, say, prayer now, one could take immensely seriously that you really are in the presence of God. I mean that this unchanging now that you're living in is infinite, and that is the presence of God. And this, if you can quieten your mind, I mean, there are various Christian contemplative practices conducive to peace, aren't there? It doesn't have to be Buddhist or proto-Hindu or something like that. There are various Christian practices. You can quieten your mind. Yeah, and be open to the unchanging now as the second person of the Trinity, as Christ, as the presence of God. These are the same thing, these three things. Now, I think that ought to make one's, you talk about deepening one's faith and deepening one's prayer and worship and so on. You've had a few things. I would have thought it would have that effect. Now, this would be the true existentialism, if you like. This would be the true existentialism. This would be the correct existentialism or the profound existentialism, right? Because this would be living in the now, being in the now, and praying in the now. It would be a recognition of God as the now in this timeless, unchanging sense. I mean, I still do meditate, but I've changed some of the kinds of meditation in a more Christian direction.
Good.
Yeah, for example, there are different kinds of Buddhist meditation, but in one kind of Buddhist meditation, which is quite profound, you pay attention to your in-breath and you pay attention to your out-breath. And in doing that, you notice the difference between a breath being the in-breath and a breath being the out-breath. And that's quite a profoundly, I don't know, effective kind of meditation. In a way, you become very relaxed. In another sense, you become very aware. And there's a kind of stillness in that. Well, I would adapt this in a Christian way so that when you hear or sense or pay attention to the in-breath coming in, you say God in, or Christ in. And on the out breath, you say rubbish out, or garbage out, or waste out, or Satan out, or shit out, or devil out. Right?
Yeah.
Now, this is a tremendously powerful form of meditation. And if you meditate like this, Christ in, devil out, or God in, waste out, whatever it is, you will be calmed and strengthened to deal with what you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis with, other human beings and objects and duties and the things we all have to do. And you'll be better equipped to deal with the human crises that we all have to face from time to time, right?
Yeah.
It's a very powerful form of meditation, but it's my own adaptation of one form of Buddhist meditation. I'm not saying nobody else has thought of it or nobody else is doing it. I'm sure if you looked on YouTube, you find somebody who does something like this.
Sure. No, but that's very helpful.
It's hard to come up with things that nobody else has thought of, but that's not the point here,
Right.
It doesn't matter whether somebody else has thought of it. I'm sure the Christian fathers would have done this sort of thing.
Yes. I think in
And,
this
and
context,
maybe and the neglected desert mothers. I'm sure they did it as well.
yeah, absolutely. Yes,
I
we
think
can
they
go
would. I
back
think
to
they
them.
would have done. I think they would have done. Yeah.
I think in this context, though, it's helpful to hear it. I've not heard you talk about this directly before, so this was very thought-provoking and helpful, I think, and just connecting some of the philosophical dots to the practical dots. I think that's very good, very, very, very helpful. I think our listeners will appreciate that. Yeah, I think
in this kind of meditation, there is, if you like, a disclosure, disclosure of being as presence and presence as being. I think in this kind of meditation that I'm recommending, there is a disclosure of the permanent in the quiet, in the stillness, in the now. The coming and going of objects and events peels away or subsides, and there's only the permanent.
Yes. No, that's good. That's good.
Which is not nothing. There necessarily is
nothing.
no nothing. No, it's necessarily being, because there is no nothing. It's pure presence, pure being.
Yeah. Right. No, that's good. No, that's
pure
good.
Consciousness.
Pure consciousness. Yeah. Yes. And that's our connection to the divine. Yeah, that's very helpful. So maybe the point isn't to solve consciousness, but to point us to the one who made us, who is pure consciousness and being and presence, of which we, even philosophically, we have a taste of, we have access to, unless and until we deny, we turn off that reality.
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard. Well, I mean, if somebody thinks that God doesn't exist, they've got no idea what God is. I mean, in a sense, of course, God is ineffable and beyond human understanding. But if somebody thinks that God exists, they've not even got a minimal understanding of the existence of God on the view that I've been putting over, because they'd be denying being and denying presence, and that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. They're soaring off the branch that they're sitting on. It's not going to work at all. So to me, although it requires, if you like, what you and I call deconditioning, or not being too swept up by the world and modernity, it's possible to know that God exists and that God is now. It's possible to have this knowledge. It's possible to have spiritual knowledge on my view, and it can't, God can't not exist, and the time can't not be now, so God can't not be present. So there can be denial in a verbal way, or I suppose in a sincere atheistic way, but all these denials are based on lack of understanding.
Yes,
they're based on lack of understanding.
Right. No, that's very good. That's very good. I think that's a good note to conclude on. I think we've covered a lot here and connected even, I think, in some ways, some further dots and from the last conversations that we've had, the previous conversations. So I think that's very good, very helpful. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
No, it's my pleasure. The now is the immanence of God. There's been a huge discussion of the transcendence of God in recent, or in the last few hundred years, but less so on the immanence of God. And the presence of being as the being of presence is the immanence of God. The God is closer to us, unimaginably close, infinitely close.
Yes.
That we're pervaded by the now.
Yes. No, that's that's good. That's good. Well,
thank you very much for inviting me,
Thank
Joshua.
you.
It's good to talk to you again.
Always good. I always enjoy it. Yeah, this is very good. Yeah, this is very helpful today. Very helpful. Thank you. My guest today has been the distinguished philosopher, great philosopher, Dr. Stephen Priest, one of the great philosophical minds of our time, a man who somehow makes metaphysics sound plausible again today, where in many ways, in many departments, in many academic institutions today, metaphysics is not something that is serious or taken seriously or practiced, as it were, but it should be. We've talked about existentialism, consciousness, and why God is not an optional add-on to our worldview, but its very foundation, even the condition for intelligibility of consciousness itself, the condition for even talking about consciousness. Consciousness, it seems, won't let us reduce the world to atoms and equations or mathematical forms. It keeps whispering that there's something more, and it confronts us, even in our existential angst, that there is a reality, a presence, even a being that it points to, a knower, or a personal ground of being itself. And maybe in becoming aware of that presence, a knower, a personal ground of being, we will understand more what it means and what it's for. This is a theological world after all. I'm Joshua Farris. Until next time, stay curious, stay thoughtful, and stay awake to the wonder that surrounds us in the world today.